Poke the Bear is brought to you by Prize Picks and the Game Time app.
And welcome into Poke the Bear episode 321, presented by Game Time. Go use that promo code CLNS to get $20 back on your first purchase. Terms apply. I am Evan Marinofski. That is Conor Ryan. Conor, what is up?
Evan, I'm doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. It's a weird day. Season's over. No playoffs. Usually would spend today previewing the first round matchup. Bruins Leafs, Bruins Panthers. Not happening this year. Season's done. No playoffs this year. None. And it's over. And it's a weird feeling. It's like relief, but it's also sadness because it's like I enjoy watching the Bruins play. I enjoy talking Bruins hockey with you guys, tweeting about it, covering it. So it is odd, but it is a relief in that I don't ever have to watch this version of the Bruins ever again.
Yeah, Evan, it's been a interesting year, I would say, right? In terms of where this team was, what the expectations were, and then to have it kind of just completely unravel, right? And it feels like there was a lot of hope and promise as to what this team was going to do, building off of last year with that team that really overachieved, clearly. And it just seemed like right from the start, right? Everything kind of went haywire. Training camp wasn't great. Guys were injured. And it just snowballed from there, right? It feels like the play on the ice wasn't good. The structure wasn't there. The goaltending didn't hold up. And it also felt like just every break didn't go their way, right? You have, the power play is not doing that well. Or put Hampus Lindholm on there. First game, breaks his kneecap, right? Like a week later, Jim Montgomery's fired. You have, Charlie McAvoy misses a majority of the season with that freak injury in Four Nations. You have guys that are playing and regressing from what their career high scoring totals were last year to where they are this season. And there's a lot of things you can point to as to why this team kind of just couldn't put it all together. Morgan Geekie even said after Tuesday's game that felt like the compete was there, just the execution wasn't at times. There'd be times where they'd be really happy first 20 minutes of a game, and then they let go of the rope and they get smoked in the second period. And then even if they try to right the ship, you don't really have the horses to claw back in those games in the third. And that was kind of a recurring theme. So, yeah, it's unfortunate, right? There's nothing better than playoff hockey, the excitement around it, the anxiety, the warmer weather, going to the Garden when it's 70, 80 degrees out. Fans are excited. There's nothing better. It's great. So it does suck that we're not going to be able to break down a playoff run this year. Not going to have Carl do his whiteboard or anything like that, at least for a playoff game, unfortunately. But it does usher in a very, very interesting summer, though. And it does feel like Bruins have a whole lot of work to do, and we're going to have an entire summer to talk about it, of what the best steps are. But in the moment, yeah, it is kind of melancholy. I do get the relief of the fact we're not watching this team anymore because they were not good. But it still sucks that we're not going to have any playoff hockey here for these next couple months.
Yeah, it blows, and that's the part of it. I have a lot of thoughts today, and I think we'll run through all of them. And I think one of the things is that a season like this was bound to happen. I think hindsight is obviously 2020. It's easy to sit here and go, well, of course, a season like this was going to happen. But I think we all, for years, I remember talking about this with you in 2020 about the window closing and can they make another run? Can they go one more time at the cup and all these different things? And over the last couple of years, and we've talked about it, the window has closed a little bit more every year. And then the 22-23 season happens and it's like, holy crap, one last gasp for Bergeron and Krejci and those guys. And they overachieved last year, and you're like, all right, well, maybe they're still really good. And they go out and they sign Lindholm and they sign Zadorov, and they trade Ullmark and they just rely on Swayman. A season like this was bound to happen. It was bound to happen. I'm not justifying it. It was awful. And we'll get into how bad it was, but it was bound to happen. And in some ways, you look at sort of how they handled the season as it went along. I still think Sweeney did the right thing at the deadline, dealing off all those core pieces, getting a bunch of draft picks, getting prospects. That is the right way to go. But I guess shame on us for not. I didn't see it being this year. I thought they were much better than this. I think they thought they were much better than this. And they weren't. And it goes back to camp. I mean, we've heard it a number of times. Training camp wasn't great. There was the Swayman drama. Your coach was halfway out the door, which we'll get to. Charlie Jacobs spoke about this with your colleague, Jim McBride. We can dive into that and how much of it's real, how much of it's not. Jim Montgomery is going to be coaching in the postseason this year. So there is, we can discuss that. The number one center you signed didn't turn out to be a number one center. Didn't work with Pasternak at first. A bunch of injury. Nothing went your way. Nothing. You got off on the wrong foot, and then you got off on the wrong foot again and again and again and again. And it felt like they were underwater the entire year.
Yeah, couldn't get going. I mean, how long did it take for them to win 3 games in a row, right? It's just the sign of a mediocre team where it feels like there was time and time again. We can probably run through all of our podcasts this season, Evan, where Bruins have a nice win against a good team, right? Feeling good about their game. And we talked about it like, are they going to go on a run here? Is this the win they needed to get going? And then they would faceplant the next game. And that happened again and again and again. And I think you look at just all the things that were going wrong with this team, right? Like, as you said, the goaltending wasn't great. And that was probably the biggest issue in terms of you just didn't have the cheat code back there between Swayman and Ullmark of the last couple of years, where even when the defense wasn't all that great or giving up chances, you were getting bailed out. And you're staying in games. And when you can stay in games and you have a greater margin of error, and you also have a guy like David Pasternak who can be a cheat code, like, if Jeremy Swayman was a league average goalie this year, this team probably is like fighting for the last wild card spot with the Canadiens. Not to say that it was just one player that fixed it. No, this was a very flawed team. But if Swayman was league average, you're probably back to you're a broken, flawed team that probably is good enough in this really crappy Eastern Conference to be in the mix. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing about if you're trying to find some optimism for next year. But as you said, it just felt like the team couldn't get out of its own way, and just there was really no positives to draw from it. There were just extended stretches here where if you're writing like a game story or something, it was following the same script. The defense wasn't good. The goaltending wasn't great. David Pasternak and Morgan Geekie were making things happen, and no one else was really contributing or doing much of anything. No one could find any traction, get into any sort of groove, and that was just the case the entire year. It was a weird year in terms of the numbers are what they are, and that kind of tells a story, but just the ebbs and flows and peaks and valleys, that happens to every team. Feels like it was just a lot of valleys. You were just mired in the Grand Canyon for most of this year, and just couldn't get anything going. It was just the way the entire year went. It was very, very odd, and something I think we look back on a couple years from now, and we'll see what this team does moving forward to kind of build off of it. But just as a microcosm or just through the lens of 1 year, weird. Just everything kind of went wrong, and just no one could really kind of find their game.
It's interesting because you mentioned if Swayman was league average, they would have been a wild card contender, and I agree. And in some ways, I'm glad it didn't happen because there were so many parts of this team that were just stale. Frederick, Coyle, Carlo had a rough year. Guys, those guys were moved, and those were guys who were here a long time, were thought to be part of this next core, and were great Bruins. Not taking anything away from what they did. But, even Elias Lindholm was another, just wasn't working, and worked at the end of the year. But for most of the year did not work, did not elevate his line mates. Zadorov had a rough year at times, although he did finish a plus 25. I'll give you credit. You can finish a plus 25 on this team. I got to give you that, even though I don't love plus minus. I can make the case that he was in the penalty box for a lot of those plays, but still, I'll give him that. Brazeau, you go down the list of guys who just underperformed. McAvoy, when he was in the lineup, kind of had a rough go of it. Yeah. So in some ways, I look at, I'm glad they're a lottery team this year, given how they were playing. I'm not saying at the beginning of the year, I hope they're a lottery team this year. But given
Jimmy Haggs, baby.
Yeah, Jimmy Haggs. The way the first 45, 50 games went, if they just, and this was our fear at the deadline, that they're just going to keep running it back. They're going to trade Frederick and Brazeau at the deadline and make a little small push. And it's what's the point? I'm glad they did what they did. And they seem, at least as of now, when we're not even a full day into the offseason, they seem to be going in a different direction roster-wise. And I think that that's good. I think there were too many stale parts. And, whether or not they were able to replace those guys is a whole nother thing. But that's the thing, is that the amount of guys who underperformed this year, We talked about this time and again. Like, you were not even getting average. You weren't even getting the mean for these guys. And that's what was so infuriating, I think, throughout the season. And that's how you knew at the beginning of the year. Like, even Pasternak started slow. Geeky was horrendous. Scratched before Montgomery was let go. And it was after Sacco took over that Geeky really started to find his game. And so it was, I remember, like, early in the season, first couple months, week by week going, can you believe these stats? Coyle's got, 5 goals and 9 points and, 30-something games and just absurdly low statistics. And that's how that's how you knew. That's how you knew it was over. And this, I think, when we look back at 24-25, you always get a feeling from each year. You always remember a certain thing about that year. 22-23 was, a heck of a year that was ended in like the deepest of heartbreak. And last year, it was an overachieving little engine that could. This year, I think, was the true end to that era. And for the Bruins' sake, hopefully for them, the start of a new one. I think that's how we're going to look back at this year if they get this offseason right. I think that's how we'll look at it.
Yeah, I think it all depends on what this team does this offseason to kind of right the ship and get things reorganized. Because I think, it depends. I think maybe 2-3 years down the road, we can look back at this year. And I think this season, clearly no one really expected this team to be as bad as they were. I could see some, maybe fans were thinking that, last year was fool's gold and they were not going to be able to, replicate what they did last year and they were going to be a wild card team. You could make that argument. I don't think anyone expected them to be a top 5 worst team in the NHL, but I think when you look at it, right, there's so many teams that have been good for so long that a lot of their timelines follow kind of the slow, inevitable decay, right? Of like little by little, you just missed the playoffs this year, but like, so-and-so is banged up. Like the power play wasn't great. We'll fix it. We'll still got a good team. We'll run it back. And then you miss the playoffs again. And then the year after that, you make some moves. You panic, so you make a few free agent signings, and it's not enough, and you finish outside the playoffs again. But you're still in that, 10th overall pick to 14th overall pick. Like, I'd almost rather you that if everything was going to completely implode, and if you're the Bruins, you need to usher in this new era, I'd rather you just faceplant than just stumble down, in the standings and get the 14th overall pick. Oh, maybe we make the playoffs this one year. Things went right. Oh, you bounced in the first round. Back to reality the next year. 13th overall pick. Like, again, it remains to be seen what the Bruins do with this pretty successful tank job of how they approach it with, a top 5 pick, who they draft, all this cap space, what they do with it, these assets they've acquired with draft picks and guys like Fraser Minton. And I think in this window, you've seen guys like Fabian Lysell show that they maybe have something more to give. If all that leads to greater returns in 25-26 and more than anything, just the promise that this team is back on the right track, then I think you look back at it as miserable as this year was. You could be like, well, they ripped the Band-Aid off. Holy shit, that month plus sucked. The whole year kind of sucked.
Whole year was pretty bad.
But they're in a better spot than a lot of other teams that are, again, just slowly kind of withering away and not willing to kind of rip the Band-Aid off. And so, yeah, it's almost like if that is the case, and we've been talking about this for years, right? After 2020, we were like, is that the last hurrah with this team? After they lose to Carolina in 22, is Bergeron done? Is this it? 22-23, like, I guess this really is it. You've been waiting for that kind of moment, and it all kind of came together at once. So maybe it's better that it all imploded at once as opposed to like you lose a player here and there. You just missed the playoffs. You're kind of in that no man's land where you feel like you can kind of maybe retool on the fly, whereas now the Bruins still think they can retool, but you are starting more from tearing it down at the studs. But you also have a lot more to work with moving forward.
Yeah, and I think the interesting part is like over this decade, I mean, we're 5 years in, you lost Chara first, then you lost Rask, then you lost Krejci, then Krejci came back, then you lost Krejci and Bergeron in the same offseason, and then you traded Marchand. So it is that era is over. Yeah. I mean, we talked about this at the deadline. That era is over. One other thought, this should be the end of the current home and away jerseys. I love them.
Bring in the new ones, baby.
I love them. They were great. They had some great memories in those. They won a Stanley Cup in those, but it's time. They should not have been back this year. They should not. That was it all year, Connor. this, I mean, I could have saved this for May or sometime during the playoffs. But we'll probably talk about it again. I actually loved the Centennial unis last year. I really did. And I got very used to seeing them on TV, and they looked good and they popped and everything. And I'm not saying you need to wear them again because it's a 1-year thing. I'm all for it. But going back to the same ones you had, and my guess is it seems like they are going to roll with new ones next year based on leaks and things like that. But it's
that very blatant video.
Yes,
the CBC posted. Yeah,
it's time. It's time for new sweaters, I think. And I think the ones that were leaked, I love those. Go back to those. Like I'm
80s,
all for it.
80s era.
Yeah, I'm for
you.
it. I'm for it. Absolutely. And I think, 30 years from now, they'll probably, or, even 10, 15 years from now, they'll have alternates from now and we'll be like, oh my God, these look amazing and everything. But it's just, need a little break. Need a little break from these. And I think with the new era of Bruins hockey getting ushered in, I think it's time that they bring in new sweaters. I'm curious what people think in terms of that, and also what style you would like, because it seems it's pretty obvious it's going to be the 80s. Our friends over at Game Time, Connor. Our friends over at Game Time. It is spring. Hockey around here is over, but Fenway Park is going to be hosting a lot of games coming up. Some nice days, hopefully. And also Celtics playoffs. Celtics playoffs are about to start, and you don't want to miss out on how great the Garden is during the postseason. So, Game Time picks. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. There's all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You have seat views. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. There's the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And there's Game Time ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Connor, what time is it?
Game time.
It's game time. I want to get to this Charlie Jacobs interview with your colleague Jim McBride, but first, people got very scared on Tuesday night when the Bruins decided to try and decided to almost beat the Devils. They got a point in overtime. I think it's ironic. It's hilarious that Fabian Lysell makes like the best play of his pro hockey career.
Season.
Yes. And essentially could have cost you a draft pick there. The fate really lies in how Philadelphia does on Thursday. So you got to wait till Thursday. If they get a point, the Bruins will stay with the fourth best odds. Whereas if they lose, Philly goes to 4 and you go to 5.
Yeah. So again, Bruins fans gonna have to join the gritty gang for a day, I guess, on Thursday. It is pretty scary though. Hell hath, no fury like the Buffalo Sabres when they have nothing on the line, because that's when they end up playing well. So we will see kind of what happens there. But yeah, I mean, you at least avoid the worst case scenario of like winning outright or winning in overtime, and the Kraken also leapfrog you and you're down to the 6th best odds. But it's clear that if you're the Bruins and you are trying to land one of those, especially coveted potential top 6 center prospects, staying at 4 gives you the best odds at doing that, right? In terms of you get a close to 20% chance of moving up to the top 2. And the furthest you can drop is number 6, which is kind of, I think, the cutoff you want, where let's say if Philly loses, you drop to number 5. The furthest you can drop is number 7. And number 7 is where, if that is the case for the Bruins, you kind of fall into that, not no man's land, but there is a little bit of a drop off after that. Whereas if you stick at 4, you've got a pretty good shot of at least landing one of those, maybe Hagen, but also like a Frundell, Denoyer, one of those players. If you fall to like 7, there's not a guarantee that those guys are around. And then what are you doing? Are you then taking a flyer on a guy that has potential, but some red flags in like McQueen? There's O'Brien, who's I think supposed to be like a good middle 6 center, but not the same, maybe held in the same regard as someone like a Frundell, Denoyer, Hagen. So, listen, you're still going to get a pretty good prospect, but I think there are, as I've said, levels to this shit. And sticking at number 4 and at least, solidifying that the first you can drop is number 6 is going to be key for this team. So unfortunately, they couldn't just outright lose. I was telling Ty during the game, I was like, I like how the Bruins desperately need to lose this game, and now they're playing like the 1970s Soviet team. You had like Pavel Zacha doing like a no-look behind the back, like pass in the slot. You had Lysell turning on the afterburners, all that stuff. I'm like, this is great. This is perfect timing for this team. And also pretty apt of how this year has gone that they're playing like that.
And Farinacci turns around and scores on it in his first NHL game. So, like, you have that, too. I did find it interesting. So, NHL Central Scouting came out on Tuesday with their final rankings of the season. They had Jake O'Brien 4th among North American skaters. Now, people should also realize they separate by North American and international. So, just because you're 3 for North American does not mean you're 3 or 4 overall. But I do wonder if a team above the Bruins, be it Chicago, San Jose, probably won't be San Jose because I'm assuming they're just going to take Schaefer, Nashville, or if Philly gets ahead of them, do they go for Jake O'Brien? And does that reestablish a new pecking order and a guy drops to you that you didn't think you had a chance at? Does the Jimmy Hagens? That's ironic because people are going to start hearing us call him Jimmy Hagens, and they're going to think of him as Jimmy Hagens, which I think is hysterical.
We'll sell the shirts out on Causeway Street when he gets
That's
drafted.
right. We can have the bootleggers outside that have like the Titty Garden shirt, love like a Jimmy Hagens shirt as well, if you want a more G-rated thing to wear. But I do find it interesting that maybe a team above you views O'Brien, or maybe a team trades up and tries to get O'Brien. I mean, again, the chances are low, but it's something to think about with the draft. So Charlie Jacobs put out a letter to fans on Wednesday, but I think the more telling thing he did was talk to Jim McBride of the Globe. And there was a lot of interesting quotes, and we'll touch on a lot of them. But I think the one that's going to get the most press, the one that we're going to talk about quite a bit, so McBride writes, while understanding the criticism of some in the fan base and media, Jacobs pointed to the success of the last decade, including a cup final appearance in the record-setting regular season of 22-23, when he said, quote, "It's hard for me to wrap my head around why people call for Neely and Sweeney's heads." Now, props for saying that, because you're going to get a lot of crap for that. A lot of people were not happy at that quote. What do you think of it? What do you think of that?
I mean, I think going into this offseason, again, I don't think it's much of a surprise that, again, barring something crazy, that
no resignation on Wednesday.
Yeah,
what the
no
hell?
resignation.
I thought it was supposed to be resignation.
It still is Wednesday, Evan, so you never know.
It's true.
But,
never know.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised. It doesn't seem like there's going to be a situation here where Don Sweeney, Kim Neely aren't calling the shots this offseason. I'm sure there's a lot of Bruins fans who are not thrilled about that. I saw, based on just me perusing through my Twitter after the game yesterday, was a lot of people calling for heads and everything like that. No surprise, given this market and the passion that's in this fan base. Like, I totally get like the frustrations, especially when how bad this year has been. A lot of fans who loved a whole lot of players that are playing for other teams now aren't very happy. So I get it. Again, I think from ownership perspective, beyond the relationships and the familiarity that they have with Sweeney and Neely, I also think they want to give them the leeway of, all right, you made this mess, how can you untangle it, right? And so I think for them, that's why they wanted to give them a look at it. Now, is all of the reasons for the Bruins coming up short rest solely on Sweeney and Neely? No, right? I think like you also need the players to execute. Like they had a wagon of a team that they were put over the top in 2022-23, and they couldn't execute. They came up just short in 19, where you had a game 7 on home ice. You couldn't do that either. And so, like, again, I think everyone is to blame, right? Everyone has played a part into why this team hasn't gotten over the hump. You can look at 2015, which everyone does, right? You can look at free agent whiffs in previous years. You can look at, not giving up more capital to try to pry, Ryan McDonough when he was available before he went to Tampa, or Mark Stone when Ottawa was holding him for a king's ransom. They traded him for a bunch of AHL scrubs, essentially sending him out to Vegas, right? And there's a whole lot of second guessing you can do. So I understand the criticism that does come with Sweeney, and a lot of it is completely warranted, especially just looking at this year. Yeah, you went in, trying to build a team and identity that's not conducive to winning in today's NHL. You were woefully short on skill and skating, and you just couldn't. You had to work so hard for offense. A lot of it that just couldn't manifest into anything. Like their approach this entire year was completely flawed. You have like how contentious the Swayman talks were, the inability to kind of just add enough talent around this team that you're almost looking ahead to the playoffs of being better equipped to take on the Panthers, who clearly have just destroyed this team's psyche. That you just built a team that couldn't keep pace against the San Jose Sharks, the Anaheim Ducks in regular season games, right? Like, so there's a lot of blame that goes around. But from the ownership's perspective, right or wrong, I think they look at the track record, they see the wins as well as the losses that have been committed by this, ownership or the decision makers, I guess you want to call them, within the team. And I think they want to give them another run at it. So, but now the pressure's on. Like, if this team makes other bad free agent signings and guys continue to regress, they don't make the right trades, the guy they draft has one goal at DC next year, or it's someone who's off the board that doesn't pan out. If it's they reach for Roger McQueen at number 4 and his back gives out, the pressure is on now that you have to nail this offseason to get back on track. Because if not, I think there's going to be other guys calling the shots next season.
This is the 1 year of the last 5 I would put on Sweeney and Neely. This is the one. I think the roster going in was flawed. They didn't do enough to address depth. The free agent signings didn't work. The years of not making your picks certainly came back to bite them this year. But that's not enough. That's not enough for them, in my opinion, to be fired. Now, does it mean that they should be the ones that are the GM and president for the next 10, 15 years? No, it doesn't. Does not mean that. But they should be tasked with getting the chance to get out of this mess. They absolutely should. And I also think, and we've talked about this before, them getting fired now. So you're bringing in, a new GM, whether you're promoting from within or you're bringing in a whole new general manager, which is what I would assume they would do right before a huge draft, right before a huge offseason, right before, you're going to have a top 5 pick. You're going to have ample space, cap space, trades, potential free agency stuff, Marner, who we'll talk about a lot in this offseason. You're going to let a new GM come and do that? I think a lot of people say, yes, absolutely. I don't want anybody. I don't want Sweeney's hand on the button. But what I would say to that is Sweeney, whether you hate him or love him, and more people hate him than love him, has been a top 10 GM for a while now. Consistent. Not the best, but in that category. If you're going to replace Don Sweeney, you got to make sure it's someone better. Mm-hmm. You can't bring in some outside stiff who is here for 5 years and sends him into the toilet. You just can't have that. And good organizations don't just turn over staff. We said this with Montgomery at the beginning of the year. Good organizations don't just willy-nilly churn through head coaches. And yes, Sweeney's had a long time here. He's had 10 years. And they've won a lot in those 10 years. They have not won a cup. I agree. That's not good. I don't want to mistake myself as oh, good, they're winning in the regular season. Yay. I don't mean that at all. But you've got to have the right guy in place. And if you're going to replace him, and I do think he deserves a shot to clean this up. You look at the past couple of years. Even when they couldn't find a right wing for David Krejci, especially around that 2019 Cup final. It wasn't their fault that Rick Nash got his concussions. They went out and they gave a ransom for Rick Nash, thinking that he was going to be with them for at least 2 to 3 years. Wasn't the case. Wasn't Don Sweeney's fault they didn't show up in Game 7 in 2019. Wasn't Sweeney's fault that they fell apart in the bubble in 2020. Tuukka Rask had left. Wasn't Sweeney's fault that happened. Wasn't Sweeney's fault that they choked against the Panthers in 2023. They overachieved last year. So yeah, this is the 1 year. This was the 1 year. And people will get on me for that, and I get it. But that's how I look at it. That's how I look at it right now.
You can look at just getting new blood in there or a new face and fresh perspective, but I wouldn't do it this offseason where you've got to just hit the ground running. You got to get a new coach. You got to do all this other stuff.
Yes, I forgot about that too. You need a new head coach.
Yeah, you have to, someone who knows the strengths of this roster, at least I mean, it would feel fairly evident that you're like, oh shit, they got David Pastrnak. I'm going to build around him. But you got to find ways to complement this group, identify its flaws, and kind of hit the ground running without that feeling out process or just doing what you need to do just to kind of get everything in order. Like the Bruins are kind of playing catch up and had a lot of moving pieces in 2015 when Don Sweeney, who was within the organization, took over, but whole new like scouting overhaul, all this stuff. They were kind of scrambling in 15, and what happens? They get 3 first-round picks, discombobulated, and look what happens. I mean, you could be like an accomplished outside hire or someone like that, but it doesn't mean that you're also ready just to hit the ground running. Like the Carolina Hurricanes, Eric Tulsky, super established, like really smart guy, really innovative. Dude looked like a deer in the headlights handling the Rantanen shit this year.
Yeah.
And again, that happens. You're a new GM, a new put in a spot like that. So do you want those same growing pains this year when you need to just get down to business and get your shit in order? Like, I think that's what you have to weigh here. And so you could go the other way. You made the compelling argument like, well, if you're making all these decisions that are going to be so critical and you got to hit the ground running, I don't want the guy that shouldn't even be here and Don Sweeney making them. I get that, but I think from the Bruins, if you're just looking for some sort of cohesion and learning from what 15 was, which was completely overhauling a lot of things on the fly in an offseason where you needed to really, hit a home run with the drafting, free agency, all that stuff, and that kind of prolonged their retool. I think they want to avoid a situation like that this year. But again, it all comes down to what Sweeney Neely now end up doing over the next couple of months.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to Neely, it's interesting because I do think he prefers the bigger, tougher, slower, power forward kind of guys. And I think they need to run away from that kind of thinking. And I think you saw that at the deadline. So if you want to tell me that there's a new president, and it's not Cam Neely anymore, okay, that's fine. Like, but for in terms of making decisions on this team and things like that and roster construction, that is Sweeney. Obviously, he has to answer to Neely, who has to answer to Charlie Jacobs, who has to answer to Jeremy Jacobs, and they made that clear in the story with McBride. But Sweeney, I'm not ready to call for his head. I'm not. And Neely, again, as president, it's just more so getting away from being the big bad Bruins. Get more skill, get more speed. I want to get to some more takeaways from this, but first, I want to remind you that for those of you listening to this show, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast, like, and leave a review. And for those watching the show on CLNS, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the Bruins Rinkside YouTube channel, where you can find our show and a lot of other great Bruins content. Lord knows, Connor, we're going to have a lot coming in the next couple months and this summer. I said the other day, I think this is going to be the busiest offseason we have. Coach, free agency, draft, trades, looking ahead to next year, dissecting what went wrong this year, going through our predictions from the start of the year. We have a lot to get through this offseason, and these shows will be our outlet to do so. So also, please make sure to turn on your notifications so you know the instant a new video drops, and we'll probably go live when big things happen. I imagine I'll do something with the draft and reacting to the pick. You just see me go like, whoa, like with a great YouTube thumbnail. So look forward. Yeah, exactly. You can look forward to that. So another thing in this story, Charlie Jacobs mentioned the firing of Jim Montgomery. And he said, quote, "I feel it was a little bit disorganized. There was a real lack of structure. You see teams to come through. They have a system. They have perhaps a fallback play, a breakout play, something. And when I watched the Boston Bruins start the season, it was just chaos. There was no organization. And I had a difficult time understanding that given Monty's record. I don't know how to answer that other than to say something just changed. And at that point, you've shopped for the groceries. You've made the meal at this point. What are you going to do?" Monty didn't necessarily have any answers, and at that point, we had to make a decision. Now, that is as declarative something and throwing someone under the bus as you could possibly do. Now, I think you and I both agree Montgomery had one foot out the door. I don't think that's any secret at this point. He was going to St. Louis. I don't think he's a great postseason coach. Again, could prove us wrong this year. Could have the Blues go on a run, and we could be like, all right, never mind. Like, take it back.
Yeah, we'll see who starts in net when these games get to like game 6 or 7.
That's right. And let's see how he does with those adjustments. But I mean, it is true. The last two coaches they've let go have, gone to other teams, had success. But I do think that an underrated part of this season, and we touched on it a lot in the fall, was you have a lame duck head coach. And then a lame duck head coach who more than likely, pretty clearly had a fallback option in St. Louis. I just don't know if he was fully invested here. And I do think that it helped contribute to the slow start.
Yeah, it's almost like everything Charlie Jacobs said, I agree with. I think whether it was 1 foot out the door, checked out, whatever it was, I thought the coaching and the tenor and everything was dreadful this year. How many times where the Bruins just had no fight and there was no answers, asking us to figure out what was wrong with the team? That was a fun stretch before he got fired. I agree with all of it. I will also say maybe you don't share that publicly, of that being a thing you first point to in a season like this, just because I know what the narrative is going to be, because you look at the track record of guys like Bruce Cassidy, and now Jim Montgomery has obviously had some success now with St. Louis. Like, the optics of it aren't good when, again, what else played into the slow start? Was there other issues with this team? Players underperforming? Like, it all does come down to the players themselves not executing. So I get why the optics probably aren't great to share that, even if I tend to agree with him. So I think that's something definitely to take note of when it comes to how Jacobs, did point to that being something that was a catalyst for why this season went off the rails. But no, like, I agree. Like, I thought training camp was disjointed, had no urgency. Team didn't look ready at all, and then got popped in the mouth in their first game against Florida. And it was fun. I was telling Ty yesterday, I was like, that was a 6-4 final. And at the time, I was like, good God, 6-4. And they had like 15 games this year. They gave up 6+ goals. So it was a sign of things to come.
It was actually pretty good in comparison to what they went on.
4 goals. Holy hell, that's good resolve there to fight back in that game. But yeah, like, it's, I don't know if it was like the main, like Monty having a foot out the door was like the main driving force, but it definitely played into it. When you look at just how much stuff wasn't right and how quickly things snowballed, a lot of everything just goes back to, the fact that he didn't have a contract. Didn't seem like there was any clarity there. The team didn't look ready. There was no adjustments made. Like, it's the whole thing is like, what, how I look at it. And like, the Blues, I think, were a better suited team for Montgomery's system, right? Where you've got guys that can be volume shooters, guys that have the skill, like Kyrou, Thomas, Buchnevich. Go down the list of guys that can kind of adhere to the quantity or quality over quantity approach that Montgomery has. And I think you have the right roster around it, you can get really strong results. I think we even saw that in 22-23. But if the roster isn't conducive to that, do you keep on sticking with your system, or do you try to, tinker things around to work with the roster you have? And maybe that's the fault of the Bruins also for not building a roster that is better suited towards Montgomery's strengths. But also, if it's not working, do you just stick with your system? Be like, well, this is my system, so we'll see if, whatever. I got a nice place in St. Louis. If this doesn't work out, peace. Like, I don't know. I don't know if that makes a good coach either. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens in the playoffs. We'll see if Joel Hofer's playing in Game 6. We'll go from there.
And we also saw this at the end of in the postseason last year, when they would get so few shots on net, and it'd be like, dude, like, finagle your system. And even players were kind of saying, like, we need to shoot more. And it's simple. And I never felt like he was the guy here. And I think a lot of the problems go back to that beginning of the year. Now, the roster had issues. I ultimately pin this season on roster construction. I think the roster was flawed, and it's armchair GMing it. It was clear, looking back on the season, that the roster was flawed. Guys underperformed magnificently throughout the year. That's not all Montgomery's fault, but I do think it set a tone. And, he did have to deal with the Swayman contract stuff. That's not easy. I'll give you that. But I do think that was sort of indicative of a slow start at the beginning of the year. And I, there's going to be a lot of fans over the next, I'm already seeing it, be like, oh, Montgomery, look at what he did in St. Louis. That is a team, as you just alluded to, in a drastically different situation. I know they were similar in the standings, but definitely a way different roster construction than you. I think it's just different. It's just different.
Yeah. And again, like what you said, like tone setting, I think that is something that's really important at the start of a season in terms of getting guys locked in and ready to go. You looked at how much the Bruins benefited in previous years of getting off to a strong start and just having that momentum. Guys feel good about their game. And then when results aren't there and your team's not ready and they're getting smoked night in, night out, and you don't have any answers and you don't share any of those things. I'm not saying that I'm like, I don't like Jim Montgomery because he wouldn't elaborate to the same degree of Bruce Cassidy. Like, I don't give a shit about that. Like, whatever. I can get what I need to write with just what's playing out on the ice, which was a bad product. But talk about setting the tone. It's like, if you say you don't have any answers and you don't know what's going on and you're going through the motions, and we go back to last year setting a tone when your captain gets punched in the freaking mouth by Sam Bennett and you want your coach to, motherfuck the refs in front of a microphone, because I think the refs do a great job. And that's the tone you want to set there. And then you get smoked in game 6 2 years ago when you could have clinched it in Florida. And the first thing you say is, oh, it was a great hockey game. Oh, well, okay. I guess that's the tones you want to set. Have fun in St. Louis. I wasn't a big fan of Jim Montgomery. I don't know if I've shared that, but
really,
again, I don't think he was the number one cause, but sure didn't help, I think is the way I view it.
No, and the complete opposite of Bruce Cassidy. And we said this a lot. They brought Montgomery in to sort of be the nice guy and to be the good cop and to massage guys and make them feel better and things like that. You need some jackasses back in that room. You need a jolt. You need a jolt, whether that's the head coach, whether that's veterans, whatever it is. You need some jackasses back in that room, in my opinion. And Montgomery, and look, there was talk of Montgomery being that at some points, but it's odd when you're not that guy and then you become that guy, because that's all right. Is this fake? Do I really believe him? Am I really intimidated by this guy? So there was a lot.
You got Jojo Siwa in the locker room. You're like, who the hell is this?
I didn't know you knew who that was.
Oh, dude, I'm more online than you think. I don't keep up with all the trends, but I have seen that one.
Jojo Siwa, classic. I didn't think that would ever be brought up in a Poke the Bear episode, but here we are.
It's the off season now. We can talk about whatever the hell we want, Evan.
Yeah, is Jojo Siwa? What's her career trajectory going to be? But when it comes to Montgomery, I there's going to be a lot of people in the next couple of weeks who are going to go, oh, look what the Blues are doing. That they let him go too early. And I see some other reporters or people who used to be reporters talking about this, it's Jim Montgomery. It's like, nah, man, like these problems all started under Jim Montgomery. So I think that's, not saying Jim Montgomery's a bad coach. I just don't think he was a fit here. And I think it was very clear he was not a fit here. So that's that. Another Jacobs quote. McBride writes, Jacobs bristles at the notion that the Bruins are a franchise unwilling to offer big contracts. The club has spent. McAvoy, Pastrnak, Swayman, Elias Lindholm, and Nikita Zadorov are examples. Jacobs says, quote, I feel that people that are hanging on to that narrative haven't done any homework. Not a little, just haven't done any homework. Said Jacobs, who said the team has dry powder to invest in the roster this summer. Quote, we've been right there every year. We're going to be there next year. We're going to be there this year and next year. I hear the same about pricing, whatever it might be. You pick a category. Guess what? We're 50-50 partners with the Players Association. So every dollar that we take in, half of it's going out the door to make sure that we have the best team possible to put on the ice and help grow this sport that we all love. Big takeaway there. They expect to be back in it next year. And we've said this the whole time. Like, this is not a team. They're not going to the bottom for the rest of, the decade. They're not going to be back, at least trying not to be back in the lottery next year. They're going to compete. And this goes back to Neely's comments a month or two ago to McBride about, everything's on the table. And this is why I keep, people, I tweeted the Marner thing last night. People are like, oh, no way they're paying that. I don't know, man. Like, maybe it's not Marner.
I would give him $15 fucking million right now.
Why is this controversial? Why is this controversial? Because you think he's bitchy? Because he's small and skilled and not big and tough? And the stuff you hear out of Toronto? Here's a guy who is pretty much a lock for 80 plus points every single freaking year. Every single year. And you're going to just say no? Like, and look, we don't like free agency. I think when you spend high in free agency, it often bites you in the ass. But a Mitch Marner type who pops up in free agency happens once every 5 to 10 years. And here you are with a bunch of money, with a clear need, and a guy who could legitimately be a superstar for you, and you're going to pass. You're going to pass. I don't understand that at all. I don't understand that. I don't get it.
No. So, yeah, I think you look at the cap space that you do have. Yeah, you desperately need – it's not just like you look positional need or anything like that. You just need like star talent, right? You need someone else that can drive play, that can be a cheat code, that can, maybe cut down some of the margins that you have where you see just how David Pastrnak by himself, maybe like with some, help from Morgan Geekie, had like a functioning line and tried his best to drag this corpse of a team into the playoffs. What if you have two wingers that could do that? Like, and yeah, it's going to cost a lot of money, but there's not a lot of guys that hit the market like that you don't have to trade assets for to help you out. And if you're also like just trying to, find ways to elevate the supporting cast around you, you've seen what David Pastrnak can do with, Elias Lindholm and Morgan Geekie. And I don't want to say that like it sounds disrespectful saying it that way of like, that's the only reason why Morgan Geekie is good is because he's with Pastrnak. But like he's taken another step forward because he's with a superstar player and they've built great chemistry. And like, I don't know if you can expect 33 goals from Geekie next year, but I think next year, if you put Lindholm, Geekie together with Pastrnak, you're going to have a pretty effective line, I would say. And if you have a chance to add another player of that caliber, that can drive play.
And there are very few, by the way, that are of that caliber.
Very few that can do that. And you're putting, I don't know, you're putting Michael Misa there. You're putting like your young center down the road. Like maybe it's not next year, but a good way to get a really talented young player going. Maybe put a guy like Mitch Marner next to him. I know Austin Matthews is a megastar franchise Hall of Famer in his own way, but also is a good spot for him to be in that he had Mitch Marner setting him up his first year to kind of get his feet down, right? So I think you look at what a guy like that could do to this team. Instead of spending, $5.5 million per year for this player and another one there. If you spend the money to get a franchise player like that can drive play with whoever on a line, and that's part of your top six, things start falling into place. If that means all of a sudden next year you've got a third line that's Fraser Minton and Fabian Lysell and insert player here, and your fourth line, like in your fourth line is already pretty much all set between Kastelik and take your pick, Farinacci, Duran, Lauko, Hustendinov, all those guys. If you just know that you have a player that can give you 80 points regardless of who he's with on your second line in Marner, I would take that, and I would spend a crap ton of money to do that.
Completely. And also they are projected, I believe, around like 25 million in cap space, correct? Yes. I think it's about that. You don't have much to re-sign. Low-Rye is I think your biggest RFA.
I think that's going to be a bridge deal. So
yeah, and then like your Morgan Geekie, who you're going to have to probably pay a little bit more than you're comfortable with. That's probably going to be a $5.5 million guy. So then you've got about 18, 17 million left. I'm not saying you spend that all on Marner. 18 or 17 million would be insane, but 14 and a half for that. How do you say no to that? And I've talked about this before, and I will say it until I'm blue in the face. My whole theory with the Bruins right now is for the next 2 to 3 years, you're probably not going to be a true Stanley Cup contender. But you can't waste David Pasternak's prime. You can't do that. You can't sink to the bottom of the league. You can't be a definitive team that's out with David Pastrnak on your roster. I mean, that's just wasting his best years. So you bring in a guy like Marner. You are a wild card contender. You're a contender for the third spot in the Atlantic. I presume you'll have better goaltending. You make all your picks. Your guys develop, and in 2 to 3 years, Haggs or Denoyer or Frindell or Mies or whoever you draft, and the guys you draft next year are going to come up and have the potential to play with a Marner or a Pastrnak. And suddenly you go from being a wild card team or a third in the Atlantic team in 2027 and 2028 to being a cup contender again by the end of the decade. I'm good with that. And that's what Marner gives you. That's what Mitch Marner gives you. And yes, of course, a play driving number one center would be better. And if one pops up that you can trade for, then you got to evaluate that. But all you got to do is pay Mitch Marner. Now, if Mitch Marner flops, then the whole front office is gone, and it's a big step. But he has been so good for so long. I have a tough time. This is not Elias Lindholm coming in, who really had one incredible season. That's like, all right, can you get that guy to duplicate it? This is Mitch Marner. This is a top 10 player in the league, top 15 or 20 at worst. But so my whole point is we know the direction they're going. They're going to have an active offseason. They're not just going to run this thing back next year. And I think Jacobs' comments make that pretty damn clear. Was there anything else in Jacobs' comments that you found that we need to talk about that was interesting?
No, I think it's more of just, again, setting the expectation that they view it as, again, more of a retool than a rebuild, which means if that's what you're thinking, then you got to be very aggressive this offseason, whether that's signings, hockey trades, making the most of this draft and the pick that you have. Like, you got to hit the ground running as soon as this offseason starts, and got a whole lot of work to do. I don't know if you're going to get it all done in one offseason, but you'd have the resources available right now to at least start doing what you can to rebuild this team and have them get back on the right track.
Absolutely. Connor, what can the people look forward to from you over at the Globe and Boston.com?
Yeah, we'll have you covered every step of the way this Bruins offseason over at Boston.com and the Boston Globe. We'll have you covered with, I said recaps. There's no recaps in the offseason, but have you covered from breakup day, talking to the players on Thursday morning. We'll have more reaction from ownership moving forward. We'll look at free agent previews, trades, the draft. We'll do a lot of focus on that, which is kind of fun. First time in a long time we actually can dive into some of these potential targets for the Bruins, which should be really interesting to see what they end up doing. So read all that stuff over at Boston.com and the Boston Globe. If you want to follow me on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, you can at Conor Ryan _93.
Go do all that. That's Conor Ryan. I'm Evan Marinofski. Poke the Bear listeners. Have a great rest of your week.